On this particular slide of the presentation, there's a discussion about new forms that may come out of the Student Access Office. What I want you to be aware is that faculty, part-time, full-time, will still continue to receive forms if you have a student who requires accommodations for a disability. Keep in mind that we've already vetted those students to have a disability and determined that the accommodations are required and necessary for that student. So if you have students who come in and unofficially say, I need this accommodation, your best course of action is to say, thank you for sharing that. What I need you to do is to contact Daniel in the Student Access Office or Susan Winters in the Student Access Office, and we can work with the student from there. Students cannot be required to come in, as you saw in that true-false question, cannot be compelled to come in to seek disability accommodations. Some students don't want accommodations, and that's the right of the student. But when it comes to forms, you do not need to sit down with a student to discuss accommodations except for in specific circumstances. So for common accommodations, additional test time is an example, a quiet room. A student may come forward, and we encourage students to talk with faculty members about any types of accommodations and how best to meet them. But if there are some unique types of accommodations, and the examples, actually the specific types, would include what we call an attendance accommodation, a screen time accommodation, or an other specific accommodation. Let me talk about each briefly. There is an attendance accommodation that has been put into place federally related to certain situations. Say a student has a disability that may require the student to miss more classes. Maybe it's diabetes, and it requires the student, if they have a certain type of a reaction as far as blood sugar levels and so on, that requires sleep, medication changes, even hospitalization, that disability-related absence will be excused as an accommodation only after the student and faculty member have sat down to discuss how the materials will be made up, because knowledge that was missed in that classroom or materials that were covered during that missed class, it's still the student's responsibility to make sure they learn that information. And so attendance accommodations, and I know when a lot of people see that, it looks like it gives the student free rein to miss class, and that's not the case at all. It only relates to disability-related absences, which in many cases don't occur at all during a given semester, depending on the type of disability. So if there is a disability accommodation related to attendance, the student and faculty member must sit down, complete the form that we provide, and return that to our office. Screen time accommodations is the second one, and that's where some students who have photosensitivity, and you may have seen before movies or video games or different things where it say some viewers who have photosensitivity may not, should not watch this video because it has strobe lighting or other types of effects. I've seen this at amusement parks related to some rides. What happens is those types of lighting, and this includes refreshing of a screen, because if you watch a video on a screen, it's a set of stills that are moving and it appears to be a motion picture. But those refresh rates can actually trigger seizures in people with certain types of seizure disorders. And so an accommodation we have for those types of disabilities is limited screen time. And so completing tests on Canvas, for example, may not be the best type of testing practice for a student with a seizure disorder that has photosensitivity. And so in that case, we would notify faculty about limited screen time. So the faculty member would sit down with the student, and I'm always available to meet as well with the student and the faculty member to discuss the specific types of accommodations related to screen time based upon that situation, unique to that student. And so a screen time accommodation does also require a sit down between faculty and student and have that form returned. The third would be a special type of accommodation. And so those would be more of the unique, individualized type accommodations. A student who has a broken hand and it happens to be the dominant hand, that's a temporary disability, but it can be just as debilitating, may require someone to type for them as far as an essay exam, someone to take notes as far as in class because they lost that ability to use that hand. And so there may be certain unique circumstances that require beyond what we would typically apply for accommodations. And again, when I say typically, I mean common types of accommodations. And that may require a sit down, again, between faculty and student to kind of map out how to handle it that semester and to sign the form. So don't think that you need to meet with every student for whom you receive a disability accommodation form, but you will receive paperwork if it is related to an attendance accommodation, a screen time accommodation, or some sort of unique accommodation that falls outside of what we would typically call standard accommodation practices. So if you have any questions about that, always feel free to reach out to our office. And again, I'm happy to sit down and meet with you and the student to go through those forms, but keep in mind, confidentiality still applies. The purpose of that meeting is only to establish accommodations, not to discuss a student's disability. A student might choose to disclose a disability, and that is any student's right, any person's right to disclose a disability. However, our office will always protect that information, and our role is to help the student to communicate with faculty members about accommodations related to disabilities that we've already vetted, that we've already established as far as being present for that student. And so same practices will apply regarding those letters that you receive, except for those specific circumstances.